An Apache warrior came begging for milk. She breastfed the baby and became the mother he needed. Lone Mesa, West Texas, autumn 1880. The sky was burning. Dusk spilled across the dry plains in hues of molten fire, settling over Lone Mesa like a silent promise of cold. Wind hissed through the gaps in a modest log cabin perched on the rim, rattling the shutters as Rachel Garrett crouched by the hearth, coaxing a stubborn flame to life. Her husband's flannel coat hung loose over her dress. The sleeves rolled to her elbows. Her hands were raw from chopping wood that morning. She fed a handful of juniper twigs into the flame and watched them catch, the crackle of resin sharp against the hush of evening. That was when the knock came. Hard, rapid, desperate. Rachel froze, every muscle taut. The second knock rattled the frame. Her hand went to the rifle leaning against the doorframe, her pulse loud in her ears. Then came a voice, raw, cracked, pleading. Please, milk, my son. He is dying. Rachel's fingers tightened on the rifle stock. She hesitated, then slid the bar from the door. A man stood on the porch, tall and broad-shouldered, his hair tied back with leather. His eyes, dark, unblinking, were the eyes of someone who had seen too much. In his arms, wrapped in a filthy blanket, lay a baby, barely breathing, mouth dry and cracked, tiny ribs showing like a ladder beneath parchment skin. Behind him, lanterns swayed in the dark. Townsfolk had gathered at a distance, whispering, fear sharp in their voices. "It's an Apache," a woman hissed. "Don't let him in." Rachel's gaze never left the infant. The child gave the faintest twitch, too weak for even a cry. She stepped forward, her voice steady but soft. "Give him to me." The man hesitated, torn between pride and desperation. "I have milk," she said firmly. "He will die out here." Something broke in his eyes. Slowly, reverently, he placed the child in her arms, so gently it made her chest ache. Rachel carried the baby to the fire, unbuttoned her blouse, and guided his mouth to her breast. For a heartbeat, he fumbled weakly, lips too dry to cling. Then he latched, and Rachel's breath shuddered out of her. Tears slipped down her cheeks as the warmth of his breath stirred against her skin. Behind her, the warrior knelt by the door, silent, firelight painting fatigue into every line of his face. A crusted wound near his collarbone marked him in blood and dirt. His voice, when it came, was little more than a rasp. "You saved him," he whispered. "You saved us." Rachel did not answer. She rocked the infant, cradling him closer, the rhythm instinctive, ancient. "What's his name?" she asked at last. "Elon Nantan." He paused, then shook his head. "No, the child. He was born Taklashim. But since his mother's death, I have not spoken it aloud." Rachel nodded, throat tight. "He is only a baby," she said softly. From outside, the townsfolk's whispers lingered, low and sharp with suspicion. Rachel stood, still holding the child. She walked to the open doorway. Faces glimmered in lantern light, wary, waiting. "He's just a baby," she said, her voice cutting across the murmurs. "And no child starves on my porch." One by one, the lanterns turned away. Inside, Elon unclasped a leather cord from around his neck. From it hung a single hawk feather, dark-tipped and wide. He held it out to her. "In my people, red-tailed hawk means protection, for those who give life." Rachel looked at the feather, then at him. "I didn't do this for thanks." His nod was solemn. "Still, it belongs to you now." She took it as though it might burn her fingers, and set it carefully beside the baby. The fire popped and spat, but the child's breathing steadied. His tiny hand twitched against her dress. Rachel looked at Elon, then down at the boy curled against her breast. "I don't know what this means," she whispered. Elon's voice was quiet, but sure. "Neither do I, but he breathes." And in that silence, the sharp lines of grief and mistrust softened, just enough for something else to take root. In the flickering hearth glow, a warrior and a widow sat side by side, while the fragile sound of a child nursing filled the spaces where fear had lived. The cabin smelled of broth and barley, a fragile comfort folded into every quiet moment. Elon ate slowly, methodically, each movement deliberate, as though even hunger had to be tamed. When his bowl was empty, he set it aside and lifted his gaze to her. They came. His voice was low, steady, but it carried the edge of memory. They left, Rachel answered softly. His eyes drifted toward the cradle, where Nathaniel slept soundly, breath small and steady, untouched by the storm that had passed. And the woman? He asked. Rachel's lips curved into a weary but resolute smile. A stew. A few kind words. Elon nodded once. A deep, knowing gesture. His eyes, dark and unblinking, held an understanding that came not from words, but from years of surviving a world built on fear. Kindness, he said, is stronger than fear, but it must be chosen. She placed her hand over his. His fingers closed around hers, warm, surprisingly gentle, bridging a gulf that had once seemed impossible. Behind them, the fire popped, embers dancing against the dark cabin walls. And beyond those walls, Lone Mesa still watched, silent and stern, its judgment lingering like a restless ghost. But inside that small room, a mother, a child, and a man forged by war sat together in a fragile peace. A peace born not of safety, but of courage, the quiet, stubborn courage to choose love over fear. They came again just after dusk, when the last light stretched thin across the dry grass and the wind shifted like an omen. Rachel felt it first, the way the crickets fell silent, the way Nathaniel whimpered in his cradle not from hunger but from something deeper, as though he too sensed the tremor beneath the earth. Elon was by the fire sharpening a blade. He paused, lifted his head, and listened. Then he heard it too. Boots, horses, voices cutting through the stillness. The pounding came hard against the door. Rachel Garrett, you got one chance. Open up. Rachel rose from her chair, her heart hammering like a trapped bird against her ribs. Elon was already at the door, tall and silent. His shadow stretched long across the cabin floor. No, she whispered, not in fear but in certainty. She laid a hand against his back. Let me open it. Elon stepped aside. Her fingers trembled against the latch, but when she pulled the door open, her gaze was steady. Amos Dillard stood there, flanked by 6 men. Among them was Ethan Cole, his long rifle slung across his chest, his face twisted in something between fury and righteousness. I warned you, Amos said, eyes darting between Rachel and the tall shadow behind her. And now you've left us no choice. Ethan stepped forward, voice sharp. Hand over the Apache. And the boy. Rachel did not move. Elon stepped into the doorway beside her. He wore no blade on his hip, no rifle in his hand. He did not need one. His presence alone was steel. You do not belong here, Amos said coldly. You do not belong to her, or to that child. Elon's silence was thunder, calm, absolute, more unsettling than 100 shouted threats. Ethan's lip curled. Say something savage. Or are you too much of a coward to face what's coming? Still Elon did not answer. He stepped forward once, only a single stride, but it placed his body fully between Rachel and the men. His chest rose slow. His eyes never wavered. Ethan moved too fast. He lunged, perhaps for the child, perhaps to shove past. But before his hand reached the threshold, Elon caught him by the wrist. Just one hand, unflinching, a single twist, precise and merciless, dropped Ethan to his knees. His rifle clattered to the ground. The other men tensed, but none dared move, not with Elon's gaze upon them. You do not own this child, Elon said at last, voice low, carrying like the roll of distant thunder. You never will. He turned slightly, his eyes cutting from Rachel to Amos, then back to the men. She is his mother, and I. His words were steady as iron. I am his father. Rachel's breath caught. The fire crackled behind them, each ember punctuating the silence. No one moved. Ethan wrenched his wrist free, seething, but did not rise. Amos took one step forward, then thought better of it. His mouth opened, closed, opened again until at last he spat the words like venom. "You'll regret this. All of you." Rachel straightened, her voice clear, strong. "You are not the law here, Mr. Dillard, and neither is your fear." Amos faltered, his jaw clenched. Then he turned. "Let's go." One by one, the men followed him into the night. Ethan last, muttering curses, rubbing the wrist that still bore Elon's grip. When the last of their footsteps faded, Rachel shut the door slowly. Her body trembled only when the latch clicked into place. She leaned against the wood, breath uneven. Elon bent and lifted the fallen rifle, setting it gently against the wall. "Are you hurt?" she asked, her voice unsteady. "No," he said simply. Rachel looked at him, then really looked at him. At the man who had not shouted, had not drawn steel, who had stood his ground with the stillness of mountains and the patience of fire. "What you said?" she whispered, barely a breath. "Was it true?" Elon's gaze softened. "What part?" "That I am his mother." He looked toward the cradle. Nathaniel stirred, sighed, then slept again. Elon's voice was quiet, but unshakable. "You fed him. You held him. You stayed. No blood makes you more his mother than that." "And you?" she asked, her throat tight. "I was ready to die for him," he answered. "So yes, I am his father." The fire whispered in the silence that followed. There they stood, the three of them. A woman who once grieved alone. A man who had believed his people's story was ending. And a child, born into the fire but cradled in arms that chose love over legacy. Outside, the wind shifted across the mesa, carrying with it the weight of a land that still judged, still tested. But inside, the air held steady. Elon, warrior of the Apache, placed his hand gently on Rachel's shoulder, as if to say, "We do not run from fire. We stand in it, together." The moon rose high above the ridgeline, silvering the hills, casting its light across the lonely plains. And in that little cabin, beneath its weathered beams, more than shelter had been built. Something larger, something enduring. A home. She whispered the name as though speaking it into the walls themselves, carving it deep and sure above the place where her son now slept. His tiny fists curled against his chest, his breath soft and steady in the cradle. When the last letter was done, Rachel traced the name with her fingertips. "There," she murmured. "Now the walls will remember, too." Behind her, the chair creaked. Elon shifted, pale and sweating, his leg wrapped in blood-soaked cloth. He had dragged the deer home through snow despite the hoof that had shattered against his thigh in its dying thrash. Stubborn, unyielding man. Rachel set the knife aside and hurried to him. She untied the bandage, the cloth stiff with blood, and dipped a rag into the bowl of boiled water. Her hands moved carefully, dabbing, cleaning, steady despite the trembling deep in her chest. "You should have waited," she whispered, binding the wound with fresh linen. "You should have let me go instead." "I've hunted since I could walk," Elon rasped, eyes dark in the glow. "The deer would not have waited for you." Rachel gave a short, breathless laugh. "Stubborn man." His lips twitched, almost a smile, but he said nothing more. She finished wrapping the wound, her fingers brushing the heat of fever burning beneath his skin. Her hand lingered. "Elon," she breathed, looking up. He met her gaze, firelight catching the weight of something unspoken in his eyes. "I'm not afraid to love you," she said, voice breaking on the words. "Not anymore." Something shifted inside him, something older than fear. His hand, calloused and strong, covered hers where it rested against his thigh. "You gave my son a name," he said, voice low and rough, heavy with more than pain. "You gave us both a place." Rachel swallowed, her throat thick. She started to reply, but Elon was already reaching for the cord around his neck. He untied it and pressed it into her palm. A necklace of corn kernels, each one dried and polished to gold, strung between bits of turquoise and carved wood. At the center hung a single white seed, smooth and round. For you, he said. So the land will remember you are part of it now. Rachel's breath caught. It's beautiful, she whispered. What does it mean? In my people's way, corn is life. It feeds the body, binds the past to the present, roots the people to the earth. This one, he touched the white seed, is rare. It means blessing, continuation. She closed her fingers over it, pressing it to her chest. And you would give this to me? Elon nodded. You are not only feeding my child. You are planting something that will outlive us both. Tears stung her eyes. She slipped the necklace over her head. It settled against her collarbone, warm from his touch, light but heavy with meaning. Outside, the wind rustled dry grass. Nathaniel stirred in his cradle, then settled again. Elon leaned back, his breath evening as the fever loosened its grip. Rachel curled at his side, resting her head against his knee. We'll plant in spring, she murmured. Corn, beans, squash. The three sisters, like your people grow. Elon's expression softened. And Nathaniel will grow strong with them. Rachel smiled through the ache in her chest. I carved his name tonight, she whispered. So the house will never forget. Elon closed his eyes. It already remembers. For a long time, there was only firelight, the crackle of wood, the soft rhythm of breathing, healing, hope, the fragile strength of something newly rooted. Rachel's fingers curled around the necklace at her throat. Somewhere deep in her soul, belonging settled like a seed in soil. Tomorrow, judgment might come knocking, but tonight they were family, not from blood, from courage, from love, and the land itself seemed to witness it. The peace didn't last. Miriam's warning came at dusk, urgent as a storm. They are coming tonight. Amos will not wait. Rachel's heart hammered as she packed. Nathaniel's blankets, a loaf of bread, strips of jerky. Elon bound the baby's cradle to a sling of leather, then took up his rifle, jaw set despite his wound. Moonlight spilled across the doorway as they slipped into the night, Rachel clutching Nathaniel close. They moved fast, feet brushing frozen grass, shadows stretching long across the clearing. The forest swallowed them, dark and vast, branches knitting into a cathedral of silence. At the creek, half frozen and silver in the moonlight, Elon raised his hand. Path climbed steep into the hills. Rachel followed, Nathaniel dozing against her chest. But before they reached the rise, moonlight flashed on steel. Rifles, dozens of them. Amos stepped forward, lantern light cutting across his sneer. Come out, he called. The Apache, the white woman, and her brat. We'll send you packing where you belong. Rachel's stomach nodded. Elon pressed her back against the stump, rifle steady, his face carved from iron. Stay, he whispered. Protect him. Rachel clutched Nathaniel, her heart pounding in her ears. She thought of the carved beam, the necklace warm on her skin, the fragile family they had fought to build. Something in her steadied, courage rising like dawn. Amos's men shifted, rifles ready. The air split with tension, then with gunfire. Not from Amos. From behind him, torch flared. A tall figure stepped forward, Reverend Jonas Clay. Beside him, a man wearing a federal badge. Sheriff Vale, the man barked. Federal Marshal. Rachel blinked, tears blurring her vision. Elon lowered his rifle, though his eyes stayed sharp. Reverend Clay's voice rang clear across the frozen creek. Back off, Amos. This family is protected. This is Rangers' territory. Amos shouted, fury warping his face. They lost that war. The war is over, the marshal said flatly. This woman, her child, and her husband are under federal protection. One more step and you'll answer to the United States. A murmur rippled through the men. Some shifted uneasily. Amos spat in the dirt. We will remember this, he hissed. You haven't seen the last of us. The marshal raised his hand. Leave, now. This is your only warning. Amos's glare flicked to Rachel, to Elon, then back to the torchlight. At last he turned, barking orders. His men melted into the dark, lanterns bobbing until the night reclaimed them. Silence rushed in, broken only by the creek's whisper. Rachel clutched Nathaniel tighter, breath shuddering. Elon swayed but stood firm, his rifle still in hand. The Reverend stepped closer, coat dusted with frost. His eyes searched theirs with quiet urgency. "Are they hurt?" Elon's voice had softened, urgency folding into something gentler as he asked, "Are they hurt?" The creek ran silver under the full glow of the moon, its water carrying the memory of that night a year ago, when law, blood, and fate had collided on its banks. Elon bent to the ground, his hand brushing over the scar on his thigh where torn cloth and pain had once bound him. The wound had healed, but the night lived on in both their hearts. A full year had passed since that night. Seasons had turned over the red hills of Lone Mesa, and life had written itself into their days with steady, deliberate strokes. Where once a single cabin had stood like a defiance against the wilderness, now a homestead grew, its spirit woven into every beam and board. Behind the house, a garden thrived. Rows of beans climbing poles, squash curling green fingers into the soil, corn standing proud and tall. In summer, blossoms painted the air with color, and in winter, dried herbs hung fragrant from the rafters. Morning light often found Rachel on the porch, her laughter carrying across the fields, as if to remind the earth itself that joy had rooted here. The old smokehouse, once filled with ash and silence, had been transformed. Rachel had turned it into a one-room school. Each morning, half a dozen children, Apache and settler alike, filed inside, their small boots clattering against the wooden threshold. She taught them letters sketched in chalk, numbers scratched in dust, and words of kindness that bridged the gap between two worlds. By sunset, they ran laughing back into the hills, leaving behind the faint smell of chalk and the echo of lessons well learned. Nathaniel, now a toddling boy with curls that caught the evening sun, would run out to greet them, proudly showing painted pebbles or holding up the crumpled paper that carried his first attempts at drawing. Inside, Elon worked with hands that had once only known weapons. Day after day, he carved wood from the tall pines he felled himself, smoothing the grain until it gleamed. Where others saw planks, he saw purpose, chairs, tables, shelves, each piece carrying his steady touch. The crib he built for Nathaniel stood strong, polished, and beautiful. Along its side, he carved Apache symbols: wind, protection, new beginnings. His heritage etched into the wood like a promise. On a quiet Sunday morning, he carried it into their room. He set it down beside Rachel's bed, his dark eyes glinting not with pride alone, but with a quiet love that asked for nothing in return. She touched the carvings with her fingertips, and in that silence, she felt the weight of all he had given her, and all she had chosen to build beside him. That evening, when the stars had pierced the sky, Elon led her to the fire circle behind their home. Strings of paper lanterns swayed from tree to tree, their glow mingling with the flicker of firelight. Wildflowers braided with sage lay in baskets nearby, their scent carried on the warm air like a blessing. Miriam Quinn sat in a chair near the flames, Nathaniel on her lap, tugging playfully at a red ribbon. Rachel turned to Elon, her brow furrowing with curiosity. Before she could ask, he lowered himself onto one knee, the fire painting his face in gold and shadow. In his palm lay a silver ring, engraved with Apache words that shimmered when the light touched them. "You speak with your heart," Elon said, voice low, steady. He looked up at her, eyes deep with the weight of his vow. "Rachel, will you live with me? Not as mine, but as my equal." For a heartbeat, the night seemed to hold its breath. Rachel's chest tightened, not with fear, but with the fullness of something long awaited. She knelt beside him, her arms circling his neck, pulling him close until her forehead rested against his. "I am already home," she whispered. The fire crackled, the lantern swayed, and Nathaniel laughed from Miriam's arms, the sound bright and unbroken. Above them, the stars stretched wide, as if the heavens themselves bore witness to a union born not of conquest or survival, but of love, trust, and the stubborn belief that two hearts, different yet bound, could create a future worth protecting. A hush settled over the guests, the kind that makes every heartbeat sound louder. Then, with a smile that carried both reverence and joy, Reverend Clay stepped forward, not as a minister presiding over vows, but as a witness to something deeper. Beside him, Miriam struck a match and lit the first lantern, its glow pushing back the dusk. Their ceremony was as unadorned as the life they had chosen together, and as beautiful. Rachel's dress had been sewn by the Apache women Elon had quietly invited from the hills. Beadwork in soft blues and whites traced across its hem like the memory of the open sky. Around her waist lay a woven sash marked with Elon's tribal symbols, threads of belonging, strength, and renewal. Her hair was unbound, wild and free, tangled with flowers gathered that morning from the meadow. They stood beneath an arch of rough-hewn wood and twining vines, hand-built by neighbors and friends, crowned with blossoms and sage. No vows were spoken. None were needed. Their hands met in the firelight, fingers locking as if they had always belonged that way. Children darted forward, laughing, scattering petals to the wind. One by one, lanterns were released into the night sky. Each flame rose higher, drifting upward until it seemed the stars themselves had descended to bear witness. Strangers no longer. Fugitives no longer. Just a man and a woman choosing each other without fear. When the final lantern slipped into the heavens, Elon took Rachel's hand and led her inside. The cabin glowed with warmth, the hearthfire steady and sure. He reached up to the thick crossbeam above the hearth, pulled free his carving knife, and pressed its edge into the wood. Slowly, carefully, he etched 3 names side by side. When he finished, he stepped back, wiped the blade on his palm, and turned to her. "This is our home now," he said. Rachel touched the carving, her fingers tracing the grooves. The names were simple, but the meaning was permanent. Not just a record of people, but a declaration of belonging. Outside, the lanterns still shimmered against the Texas sky. Inside, the cabin rang with laughter, warmth, and the promise of tomorrow. 2 hearts, once broken, once guarded, had chosen not just to endure, but to live and to love together. And if this story stirred something in you, if you felt the weight of love breaking through fear, if you saw yourself in the firelight of 2 souls defying the odds, then stay a while longer. Because out there, beyond the horizon, more stories are waiting, and the wind is already carrying them your way. On a quiet Sunday morning, Elon set the final piece of his labor beside Rachel's bed. The crib, built by his own hands, was sturdy and polished, its surface smooth from hours of care. Etched into its side were Apache symbols: wind, protection, new beginnings. His dark eyes gleamed with pride, not boastful, but quiet, reverent. It was more than a gift of wood. It was a promise of tomorrow. That evening, beneath a sky pierced with starlight, Elon led Rachel to the fire circle behind their home. Strings of paper lanterns swayed gently between the trees, casting pools of warm light that danced against the dark. Wildflowers, braided with sage, rested in baskets, their fragrance lifting softly into the air. Nearby, Miriam Quinn sat with little Nathaniel on her lap, the boy giggling as he twisted a ribbon between his hands. Rachel looked at Elon, her brows drawn in curiosity. He dropped to one knee, the firelight flickering across his face, and opened his palm. Resting there was a silver ring, engraved with Apache words that shimmered as though the flames themselves had blessed them. "You speak with your heart," Elon said, his voice tender but steady. "Rachel, will you live with me not as mine, but as my equal?" Rachel's breath caught, her heart swelling with something beyond words. She sank beside him, wrapping her arms around his neck and pulling him close. Her answer came as softly as the night wind. "I am already home." A hush swept through the gathered guests, the kind of silence that holds both awe and joy. Then, Reverend Clay stepped forward, not as minister, but as witness. Miriam leaned forward, lighting the first lantern, its glow rising into the night. Their ceremony unfolded without grandeur, yet with a beauty that outshone any cathedral. Rachel's dress had been sewn by Apache women Elon had quietly invited from the hills. Its beadwork shimmered in shades of sky blue and white, and around her waist, a sash bore Elon's tribal symbols, weaving heritage into the fabric of her new life. Her hair flowed freely, crowned with wildflowers gathered that morning. Together, they stood beneath an arch of wood and vines, built by hand, alive with blossoms. No vows were spoken, none were needed. Their hands, joined in the firelight, spoke the only promise that mattered. Children laughed and tossed petals into the air as lanterns lifted one by one, floating skyward until they looked like stars drifting down to bless this union. No longer strangers, no longer fugitives, simply two souls who had chosen love over fear. When the last lantern disappeared into the heavens, Elon took Rachel's hand and guided her back into the cabin. The fire in the hearth glowed bright, steady, welcoming. From the mantel, he pulled down his carving knife and pressed it to the thick beam above the hearth. Slowly, carefully, he carved 3 names into the wood. Stepping back, he turned to her, his gaze steady. "This is our home now." Rachel reached up, fingertips tracing the grooves. So simple, so permanent. It was more than names. It was belonging, carved into the bones of the house itself. Outside, lanterns still glowed against the Texas night. Inside, laughter and warmth wrapped around them like a blanket. And beneath that endless sky, 2 hearts, once broken, once guarded, had not just survived, but chosen to live, fully and together. If the story touched something within you, if you felt the weight of love breaking through fear, if you saw yourself in the firelight of 2 souls who dared to choose each other against the odds, then stay a while longer.